Elizabeth and Stanhope Forbes, A Marriage of Art. This exhibition celebrates the married couple who were the powerhouse behind the success of the Newlyn School of Art. It explores the work of both Elizabeth and Stanhope and their legacy on this fascinating period of British art history. In the mid-19th century, a group of French artists, including Monet, Renoir and Pissarro, were becoming dissatisfied with the contemporary emphasis on the academic subjects of history and mythology in art. By the 1860s, they had developed a new aesthetic, one which downgraded the importance of the traditional subject matter and shifted attention to the artist's manipulation of colour, tone and texture as ends in themselves. The technique of painting en plein air rather than in a studio allowed the painter to capture the momentary and transient effects of sunlight by working quickly in front of their subject, often resulting in the use of lighter, looser brushwork and a joyful palette of colours. British artists soon followed their lead and began to visit rural areas. Stanhope and Elizabeth Forbes, among many others, chose the small Cornish fishing village of Newlyn on the shores of Mounts Bay to become the centre of this new movement in British art, founding the Newlyn School in the 1880s. Artists were attracted to the area by the beauty of the scenery, the quality of light, the drama of the sea, the cheap living and the availability of inexpensive models. They were fascinated by the fishermen's working life at sea, as well as the traditional industries that took place in the harbour and nearby villages. Many followed the Impressionist doctrine of working directly from the subject and, where appropriate, in the open air. Their paintings became highly regarded and were regularly exhibited in the Royal Academy. When Alexander Stanhope Forbes married Elizabeth Adela Armstrong in 1889, they were both already well-established and successful artists. Unusually for the time, Elizabeth did not curtail her career after the wedding and continued to paint and exhibit right up to her untimely death aged just 52. Although Elizabeth achieved international recognition, she soon became overshadowed by her male contemporaries. This exhibition aims to put these two outstanding artists on an equal footing and show the importance of both to the development of British Impressionism. The first painting is by Elizabeth Forbes. It is titled Zandvoort Fisher Girl and was painted in 1884 in oil on canvas. Zandvoort is a coastal town in Holland, about 20 miles west of Amsterdam. This is a portrait of a young girl, most likely in her teens, standing with her left hand on her hip, gazing directly at the viewer. In her right hand she holds a large green dish containing several fish against her hip. Her auburn hair is parted in the middle and tied back. She wears a dark-coloured blouse and a long blue apron from her waist. Behind her is a rough tiled wall with tiles missing. Light comes from behind the girl from a window in the top right of the painting, suggesting that she might be standing in a cellar. Moving along, we have a close-up portrait titled A Newlyn Maid, undated and painted by Elizabeth in oil on canvas. This work is painted in soft, muted tones of browns and cream. The portrait is of a young girl, possibly in her early teens. She gazes towards the left of the image with large blue-grey eyes, wearing a soft expression. Her dark hair is tied back and she has a full fringe. She wears a red checked scarf around her neck, which gives a pop of colour and highlights the rosiness of her cheeks and lips. She is wearing a brown, thick blouse or jacket with dark-coloured buttons. Next we have another artwork by Elizabeth, titled The Cornish Pasty and painted circa 1885. This is a small print, a dry point engraving on paper. It is a dark monochromatic image of the interior of a cottage. On the left, in the light from a window, a woman is rolling pastry at a table. Her hair is tied back and an apron is tied at her waist. An elderly woman wearing a bonnet sits at the table facing the viewer. A young boy stands in the middle of the scene watching the woman while she works. On the right, another woman is putting a kettle onto the fire. Next we have another dry point engraving by Elizabeth titled An Old Dame of Pont Avon, created circa 1882. This is a close-up portrait of an elderly woman looking directly at the viewer. She has a full round face and wears a tall hat which is white with dark bands around the middle. She is wearing a dark dress with a wide white collar. Moving along, we come to a painting by Stanhope Forbes titled On Paul Hill. It was painted in oil on canvas in 1922. Full of colour and light, this is a busy and vibrant scene from a hilltop overlooking a coastal village. In the foreground is a lane which leads down the hillside towards the village. On the left is a boy dressed in brown with a flat cap leading two horses pulling a hay cart towards the centre of the scene. Beyond, groups of children in colourful clothing are walking up the steep lane, most likely on their way back from school on a summer's day. On the right, two children lean against a tall tree. In the distance is the sea and the beach and the buildings of the village, including a church. Stanhope Forbes lost Elizabeth to cancer in 1912, and their only child, Alec, was killed in the First World War 4 years later. After the horror, this painting is full of optimism, with the next generation basking in the Cornish sunshine. But in the far distance, the cenotaph, completed the year this was painted, shines like a beacon to remember those lost to save such an idyll. To your right is an archway. Stay in this gallery and move along to the right of the archway. Please be aware that there is a low barrier running diagonally across this corner of the gallery to protect unglazed artworks in this section. First, we have a painting by Stanhope Forbes titled Relibus Bridge, painted in 1929 in oil on canvas. The artist has used a palette of mostly rich browns and greens. In this scene, a pale stone bridge expands from the left to right. The side of the bridge is covered with moss, ferns and ivy. The rust-brown riverbed can be seen through the clear water running below. At the bottom right is a grassy bank. There are figures on the bridge. A group of 4 people are leaning on the bridge wall looking into the water below. On the far side are 2 men wearing dark jackets and hats. On the right, a man is leading a horse onto the bridge, and in the distance are tall trees beneath a cloudy grey sky. Next is another painting by Stanhope titled A Street in Newlyn. This is a view of Bowes Street in Newlyn, painted in 1885 in oil on canvas. It depicts a steep, narrow street with cottages either side. On the left, a woman in a dark hat and dress with a light skirt apron is talking with a young girl wearing a pink pinafore and a dark hat. More figures can be seen on the doorsteps of the cottages in the distance, and also lines of laundry hanging outside windows. The cottages are painted in different colours. One is a pink colour, another yellow, and there are also brown and white. The small section of sky above the street is a cloudy pale grey, almost white. Moving along is a painting by Elizabeth Forbes titled Peeling Onions. It was painted between 1885 and 1889 in oil on canvas. On a dark background, this is a full-length portrait of a young girl sitting on a wooden chair peeling onions. She is wearing a blue dress and her blonde hair is partly covered by a white cap. The bowl of onions rests in her lap as she peels them with a knife. She is looking towards the light from a window on the left of the scene, which illuminates her face. Now turn to the wall on your right. Here we have a portrait of Elizabeth Forbes painted by her husband Stanhope. It was painted in 1890 in oil on canvas. Next to it is a blown-up image of the painting. The portrait is painted in a narrow palette of earthy tones, pale grey with browns, some which are slightly green in tone. In the portrait, Elizabeth is facing the left of the picture. She has curly dark brown hair which is tied back at her neck. She wears a dark dress with a high collar and a tie at the neck, typical of Victorian ladies' fashion. Her gaze is pensive, with her mouth slightly open. Elizabeth Adela Armstrong was born in Ontario, Canada on December 29, 1859. Her father, William Armstrong, worked for the government of the United Provinces of Canada. Elizabeth was educated privately in Canada and was then allowed to further her artistic studies in England at the South Kensington School of Art, London, with her mother as chaperone. They lived in Chelsea, next door to Dante Gabriele Rossetti, though she was not part of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood's social circle. After the death of her father, she returned to Canada, and then from 1877 to 1880, she studied at the Art Students League of New York with William Merritt Chase, who recommended that she next study in Munich. She faced considerable prejudice in Germany as both an American and a woman, and so, accompanied by her ever-supportive mother, she moved to the tiny town of Pont-Aven in Brittany. Here Elizabeth found companionship and encouragement and made her first steps towards producing work for exhibition and being accepted as a professional artist. In 1885, after periods working in the Netherlands and London, where she was friendly with many of the avant-garde artists of the day, including James Abbott McNeill Whistler and Walter Sickert, Elizabeth settled in Newlyn, Cornwall, searching, as so many artists were, for a British equivalent to the beauty and light of Pont-Aven. Here she met Stanhope Forbes, and after their marriage she exhibited as Miss Elizabeth Stanhope Forbes at a time when it was unusual for women to use their own first name in formal situations. Her work often placed an emphasis on landscape, fantasy and children, interests she shared with other artists of the time who were drawn towards pre-Raphaelite subjects and Impressionist techniques. Elizabeth was unafraid to innovate. She experimented with different media and was less naturalistic than many of her contemporaries. Many of her paintings evidence a stylistic interplay between broadly handled areas and more precise details in scenes that move between the real and the imagined world. Forbes' works conjure a poetic quality, show a beautiful use of colour, and display enormous technical skill. Today it is important to illustrate her place within the vanguard of British Impressionism, her relationship of equal partnership with Stanhope Forbes, and her interest as an artist in her own right, who drew much praise in her lifetime. To your right is an archway. Stay in this gallery and move to the right of the archway. Here we have a self-portrait by Stanhope Forbes. Next to it is a blown-up image of the painting. It was painted in 1890 in oil on canvas around the same time as he painted the portrait of Elizabeth and using the same muted earthy colours. In the portrait, Forbes is turned towards the left of the composition while looking ahead at the viewer. He has a slim face with a moustache and has a slim build. He is wearing a flat cap beneath which his light brown receding hair can be seen. He has a white shirt collar and wears a dark tie and a dark jacket. Stanhope Forbes was born in Dublin in 1857. His father William, manager of the Midland and Western Railway of Ireland, encouraged his son to share his love for literature, but it was his French mother, Juliet, who was the most dominant force in Stanhope's life. She was hugely ambitious for him, and after first noticing his skill in sketching on a holiday in the Ardennes when he was 11, she encouraged him to study at the Lambeth School of Art, followed by the Royal Academy School, before going on to Paris in 1880. Whilst in Paris, a friend encouraged him to visit Brittany to explore his newfound interest in the plein-air school of painting. He headed to Cancale, where he painted Street in Brittany, the picture that launched his career. It was so well received at the 1882 Royal Academy Summer Exhibition that it sold later that year to the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. Having completed his studies in France, Forbes returned to London and showed works he made in Brittany at the 1883 Royal Academy and Royal Hibernian Academy shows. In 1884 he moved to Newlyn in Cornwall and soon became a leading figure in the growing colony of artists. Of this place, Forbes said, "I had come from France and wandering down into Cornwall came one spring morning along that dusty road by which Newlyn is approached from Penzance. Little did I think that the cluster of grey-roofed houses which I saw before me against the hillside would be my home for many years." Forbes generally painted genre scenes and landscapes en plein air, with a particular skill for capturing light and reflection. He was also adept at capturing the warm and charming effects of lighting on a room and the people in it in his interior scenes. Friend and fellow artist Norman Garstin said of Forbes, "He is a good unsentimental painter. His work has a sense of sincerity that appeals to everyone." Now turn to the wall on your right. Here we have a self-portrait by Elizabeth Forbes in dry point on paper, created in 1882. In this close-up portrait, the artist is gazing just beyond the viewer's right shoulder. She has wavy dark hair and is wearing a high ruffled white collar. Next is another etching by Elizabeth Forbes titled A Village Bakehouse and created in 1887. This scene is the interior of a village bakehouse with a flagstone floor. At the top centre of the image, a woman can be seen putting loaves into the bread oven on a long-handled paddle. A workbench runs along the left side of the scene where a young girl with her hair in a plait wearing a pinafore stands holding a wicker basket. Moving along, we come to a painting by Elizabeth Forbes titled Autumn Breeze. It is undated and painted in oil on canvas. This is an above-the-waist portrait of a wind-swept young woman walking outdoors on a breezy autumn day. She is wrapped in a blue shawl and faces the right of the picture. Long grass can be seen in the distance, and above her are the swaying branches of a tree. The sky is cloudy and grey with tints of pink. Next is a painting by Stanhope Forbes titled Penolver. It was painted in 1913 in oil on canvas. This rural autumnal scene depicts a muddy lane alongside farm buildings. On the lane, a woman is approaching, walking alongside a white horse pulling a hay-filled cart. Another figure can be seen sitting on top of the piled-up hay in the cart. They are approaching a dip in the foreground of the image, which is filled with muddy water. Wooden and stone farm buildings stand on the left of the scene, and there is a group of trees standing in the distance with rich reddish-brown leaves. The barn depicted here is just off the road from Mousehole to Poole. It still stands, although it has been converted into a dwelling. Moving along, we come to a painting by Elizabeth Forbes titled The Minuet. It is undated and painted in oil on canvas. The painting depicts a room in which a group of elegantly dressed young women and a girl are enjoying an afternoon, perhaps, of music and dance. On the right, a young woman in a long blue dress is seated playing a piano with sheet music in front of her. On the left, a woman and a red-haired young girl are dancing. The young girl is holding the skirts of her peach-coloured dress. A second woman is dancing in the background, and behind her is a large window with pale, delicate curtains. Another child, perhaps a boy, is at the window looking out. The room is dark and candlelit, but daylight pours through the window and illuminates the polished dark floorboards where the figures are dancing. We now come to a painting by Stanhope Forbes titled The E String, painted in 1916 in oil on canvas. This is a seated portrait of a grey-haired and bearded musician tuning his violin, which he holds upright in his lap. On the right of the picture is a music stand with an open book of sheet music. In the dark background is a tall shelf of books. Golden light pours from a window beyond the left-hand edge of the picture and falls across the musician's face and onto his hands as he holds the neck of the violin and works. Moving on, we have a painting by Stanhope Forbes titled Treasure Island. It was painted in oil on canvas in 1920. This is an interior scene depicting a group of figures gathered round a table. On the left, with his back to the viewer, a man with a long beard has his right hand on an open page of a book which lies on the table. Next to him is a long-haired girl wearing a red beret. She holds her hand to her chin as she looks down at the book in concentration. The man is possibly using his hand to guide her across the page as she reads from the book. Standing to her left is a boy who looks over her shoulder and rests his hand on the table. Next to him, dominating the right-hand side of the scene, is an older gentleman with a moustache sitting with his elbow resting on the table and his hand cupping the side of his chin. He is looking into the distance to the left with his attention focused away from the book. Light enters the scene from the right, illuminating the older gentleman's face and hand and falling onto the book's open page. The next artwork is also by Stanhope Forbes. This is a portrait titled The Farmer's Wife. It is undated and painted in oil on canvas. In a narrow palette of browns, blue and white, this is a gentle, above-the-knee portrait of a woman looking down into a large bowl that she holds with both hands against her right hip. Her dark hair is covered by a brown patterned headscarf. She wears a loose blue blouse with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her blouse is tucked into a white apron. Moving along, we come to a painting by Stanhope titled Snared. It was painted in oil on canvas in 1907. This is a dark nighttime scene depicting a group of men who have spent the evening rabbiting. They are sitting together on the ground, their faces illuminated by the warm orange glow of a lantern. 2 dead rabbits lie on the ground, and a man sitting on the left of the scene is holding another dead rabbit. To his right is a man holding a rifle, and at his side is a brown dog. A younger man wearing a hat stands behind the dog holding the lantern. Now turn to your right. Here we have a display case containing a selection of illustrated letters by Stanhope Forbes. They are written in black ink and some of the illustrations are in colour. The illustrations are of people. One shows a couple standing side by side at easels, each holding a palette while painting. Another shows a man on the sea rowing a small sailboat. Another shows a woman playing tennis. Above the case on the wall are 2 paintings. The first is by Elizabeth Forbes and is titled Museum Interior. It was painted between 1873 and 1877 in oil on panel. It depicts a receding line of sculpted busts on top of pillars against a red wall. There are some plaques on the wall which look ancient Egyptian. Next to this is a portrait by Stanhope Forbes of the artist's son, Alec. It was painted circa 1904 in watercolour on paper. This is a profile portrait of the young Alec, facing left. He has fair skin and strawberry blonde hair. He is wearing a pale blue jacket and a peak cap. You are now at the top of the gallery near to the gallery desk. The exhibition continues in another gallery leading from the bottom of this one. As you walk back down the gallery, in the centre there are seats provided for the comfort of visitors. Further along you will come to 2 exhibition cases positioned back to back. In the left-hand case there is an open art journal titled The Paperchase, produced by Elizabeth Forbes and F. Tennyson Jessie. Jessie was an English criminologist, journalist and author, as well as one of the first female war correspondents. She was a great-niece of Alfred, Lord Tennyson. Jessie arrived in Cornwall in 1906 with her cousin Cicely and moved with Dodd Shaw, who later became Dodd Proctor, to Myrtle Cottage, Newlyn. Their purpose was to study with Stanhope and Elizabeth Forbes at the Newlyn School of Painting. Jessie was to become a close friend of Elizabeth Forbes and was given her first chance at writing with Elizabeth's support as editor of the Paperchase. She later recalled, "Nothing I wrote for it was any good." She went on to write several influential criminology books and novels. On the left-hand page of the open journal is the list of contents, and on the right-hand page is a sketch portrait of Norman Garstin. This is a side portrait of an older gentleman sitting in an armchair reading and smoking a pipe with one leg crossed over the other. He wears a suit and has glasses and a beard. Now move around to the second case. In this case are 2 more prints from the art journal The Paperchase. The left-hand print is by Stanhope Forbes and is titled The Clarinet Player. This is a portrait from the waist up of a bald gentleman with a moustache and wearing a dark suit jacket playing the clarinet. The print on the right is of a young woman with long dark hair sitting in a woodland. She wears a long floral print dress with a white lace-edged shawl around her shoulders tied with a dark bow. She wears a white covering or cap over her hair. Her hands are resting on a large book lying open in her lap, and she is gazing dreamily into the distance. On the page below the print it is typed, "And nature, the old nurse, took the child upon her knee, saying, Here is a storybook thy father has written for thee." Now go through the archway at the bottom of the gallery, which leads into the next gallery where the exhibition continues. As you go through the archway, turn to your left. The first section of this gallery focuses on artists who, like Elizabeth and Stanhope Forbes, were also influenced by Impressionism. The New English Art Club, the NEAC, was founded in 1886 by a group of artists who were influenced by French Impressionism and dissatisfied with the entrenched attitudes of the Royal Academy. Key early members were James Abbott McNeill Whistler, Walter Sickert and Philip Steer. Initially avant-garde, the NEAC became increasingly conservative but remained important as a showcase for advanced art until 1911, when it began to be challenged by the Camden Town Group and London Group. It continued to be influential into the 1920s, with artists such as Augustus John exhibiting. The NEAC still exists, continuing to develop diverse styles, adding richness and variety to British art. The first artwork is an etching by Camille Pissarro, who was a key artist in the Impressionism movement. It is titled Effet de pluie. Created with loose marks, this rural scene depicts a wheat field on a day of heavy rain. Two farm workers are in the bottom left of the scene resting. One sitting and one standing, they are looking towards the brightening sky in the distance. Diagonal lines over the scene depict the heavy rainfall. Next is a lithograph by James Abbott McNeill Whistler, dated 1879 and titled Victoria Club. Elizabeth Forbes was good friends with Whistler. Her etchings in particular are said to show his influence. This artwork shows the facade of a building with large windows with arches above. There are figures on the pavement and in the street, the men wearing hats and the women long dresses. The next artwork is an etching by Sir George Clausen, titled Little Meg, created in 1882. The sitter in this portrait is Clausen's daughter, Margaret Mary, at 7 years old. She is portrayed using free and impressionistic strokes. The young girl looks over her right shoulder with her gaze focused to the right of the viewer. Her fair hair is tied at the back and she has a straight fringe. She is wearing a white dress or blouse with a wide scalloped-edged collar. Clausen painted landscapes and scenes of peasant life. He was also particularly skilled using pastels, and these works are particularly atmospheric. He was a Royal Academician and worked as a war artist during World War I. He lived a long life until 92 years of age and died in Berkshire in 1944. Now turn to the wall on your right. Here we have a painting in watercolour by Paul Nash titled Hills and the Plain. It was painted circa 1940. This is a view of the Malvern Hills, which appear in the distance on the left of the scene. Horizontal strokes and loose brush marks represent the trees and fields in the mid-distance. Nash has used a restricted palette of pale greys, browns and blues, which gives a calm and cooling feel to the work. Next we have an artwork by Duncan Grant, produced in 1935 in oil and crayon on paper. It is titled Sketch for the Queen Mary. This pastel-coloured, loosely executed sketch of two half-naked women playing on a hillside while gathering flowers was a preparatory study for the Flower Gatherers panel, which was intended by Grant to be hung over one of the fireplaces in the first-class lounge of RMS Queen Mary. Undertaking her maiden voyage in May 1936, the Queen Mary was a spectacular ocean liner who took the blue ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic later that year. In 1935, 30 contemporary artists were commissioned to create designs for the ship's interior. Sadly, Grant's exuberant designs were considerably more modern than the Cunard Shipping Company was ready for. The final decoration for the lounge was more restrained and more fashionable than Grant's very individual painting style and execution. Next we have two sketches by Augustus John. The top artwork, drawn in pen and ink, depicts a Vardo, the traditional horse-drawn carriage home to Romany travelling communities. It stands either in a field or on a grassy verge. Two women are sitting in the grass beside the wagon at the bottom left of the scene. Below this is an etching by Augustus John titled The Caravan with a Horse, dated 1910. In this rural scene, a man is leaning against a gypsy wagon while a pale grey horse stands in the foreground facing the right edge of the scene. Moving along, we come to an artwork by Dame Laura Knight. This painting is titled Lake Windermere and Langdale Pikes. It was painted circa 1945 in oil on canvas. It is a stunning landscape of Lake Windermere with the sun rising above Langdale Pikes, painted in a soft palette of pastel greys, blues and pinks. A variety of cloud formations spread across the enormous sky, and below the sun's rays pour over the pikes and glisten on the surface of the lake. Now turn to your right to the far wall of this gallery. The first artwork on this wall is by Stanhope Forbes. It is titled Lighting Up Time and was painted in 1902 in oil on canvas. Here Forbes has captured the beautiful fading light in the cloudy sky above a carter with his horse and cart carrying 3 passengers on a country lane at dusk. The viewer stands near the rear of the cart, giving a close-up view of its occupants. The carter stands next to the cart lighting a lamp. The warm light from the lamp draws the viewer's focus in this dark scene onto the carter's illuminated, young and soft-featured face. On the left of the scene, a woman passenger sits in the cart cradling a sleeping young child, and next to her sits an older girl. On the right of the scene, alongside the winding lane, there are several dots of warm light, the glow from cottage windows. Moving along, we come to one of the Worcester City Collection's best-loved artworks, Chadding on Mounts Bay by Stanhope Forbes. Painted in 1902 in oil on canvas, this light and colourful scene shows 6 children in a fishing boat out on the tranquil waters around Mounts Bay. In the centre, a boy dressed in brown wearing a floppy fishing hat stands holding up a small silver fish on the end of a line. On his right, another boy in a flat cap leans over the side of the boat with his line in the water. At the other end of the boat, on the left of the composition, a blonde-haired boy in a red jumper sits on the side holding his line in the water. Behind him sit 2 girls in pale blouses and wearing bonnets, and another boy in a straw boater. The white boat is reflected in the glassy blue surface of the water. In the distance are more fishing boats and the faraway coastline. On the wall to your right is a projection of images, plates from a children's book written and illustrated by Elizabeth Forbes in 1904. The book is titled King Arthur's Wood, A Fairy Story, and with it the tale retold of Sir Gareth of Orkney and ye Lady of ye Castle Perilous. This story was written for Elizabeth's son Alec, who features as the character Miles. References to Trevellow Wood near Lamorna as Merlin's Wood in the novels of Charles Marriott and Cecily Sidgwick have confirmed that it was this wood that inspired Elizabeth's fairy tale, as well as a large number of her paintings. She is recorded as painting in Trevellow Wood as early as 1895. Now turn to the wall on your right. First we have an exhibition case containing the book King Arthur's Wood by Elizabeth. It is covered in Hessian and the book's title and illustration of a wood are printed in black. On the wall above the exhibition case are 2 printed plates from the book. The top plate is titled, She Rose and Bent Over the Sleeping Children. This shows a woman standing on the left of the picture holding a lit candle and looking down at 2 children, a boy and a girl, asleep in their beds. The bottom plate is titled, And Then Came Riding Sir Gareth. In this picture, a knight in full armour riding a bay horse stands on a calm shoreline with his hand raised to his brow, looking into the distance towards the left of the scene. Behind him, on the far right, a group of 3 more knights are riding towards him, carrying spears. On the left is a large rocky outcrop. To your right is a tall exhibition case. Inside the case, on a plinth, stands a framed portrait of Stanhope Forbes at his easel. This was drawn by Elizabeth in pencil on paper in the 1890s. In the portrait, Stanhope is standing at his easel, which is out of the frame. He has a slim build with short hair and a moustache. He is gazing towards but not directly at the viewer. He is wearing a dark suit jacket and holds a paintbrush in his right hand and a paint palette in his left. We have now come to the end of the exhibition. You can make your way through the archway on your right back into the main gallery. The exit is at the top of the gallery to the right of the art gallery desk. This exhibition has sought to place Stanhope and Elizabeth Forbes as equals. It is often the fate of women artists to be remembered largely as an appendage of their more famous husbands. Both artists were exceptional and influential, working together as the powerhouse behind the success of the Newlyn School of Art, nurturing future generations of artists and changing the course of British art as vanguards of Impressionism. Elizabeth's death in 1912 was a huge blow to the community. She was extremely well respected and admired. Friend and fellow artist Norman Garstin said of her, "Mrs. Stanhope Forbes' work does not ask you for any of that chivalrous gentleness in which itself is so derogatory to the powers of women. As an artist, she stands shoulder to shoulder with the very best." Stanhope mourned the loss of his wife deeply. He suffered further loss in 1916 when their only child, Alec, was killed in action in France after having joined the Duke of Cornwall's light infantry as a sub-lieutenant the previous year. Stanhope married a family friend and previous student, Maudie Palmer, in 1915 and continued to paint. Well into the 1930s, he was still often seen painting on plein air in Newlyn, surrounded by curious local children. He died in 1947, a few months short of his 90th birthday. In his tribute at Stanhope's funeral, Lamorna Birch remarked, "He looked through the windows of his soul and painted the truth of his great observation." We hope you have enjoyed this exhibition and your visit today. We hope to see you again soon.